Okay, my name's Tim Lang. I'm Professor of Food Policy at City University in London, about as far in Britain as you can get away from agriculture, actually, and all the things that matter in food. Yes, I think we should be very, very concerned about the water footprint, and indeed the ecological footprint of the food that we eat. It's the hidden relationship we have. We know at one hand that there is an ethical dimension, there's a trading and economic dimension, but we haven't thought nearly enough about what we eat as we import into Britain is actually using other people's land. Now, a lot of people bridle and think, why am I saying other people's land? Surely it's everyone's, it's humanity's. The reality is, land is carved up actually. It is owned, it's under national jurisdictions, it's owned by big companies, big vested interests. And they are really the interests which are determining the food that we get today. And they're not accounting for this ecological footprint. And many of us in my world think that water is going to be probably the deciding issue. There's a lot of discussion rightly about climate change, about oil, about peak oil, about energy sources, jetting, shipping, trucking food around the globe, often very wastefully. But many of us think that water is going to be the crunch issue because not least is water necessary for growing food, but it's this hidden currency. Every time I eat a Kenyan green bean stem, it's 4 litres of potable water, is one estimate. The water accounting in food is going to be absolutely critical, and it's not costed, no one's paying for it. And very often, when we import from developing countries, our companies in the rich West, in countries like Britain, take a very strong view on making sure the standards are good, the hygiene's good. So you have this paradox of, due to our commercial and consumer power in the West, countries like Britain, we are imposing our demands on the developing world, and meaning that actually we're taking their best. So you get this bizarre situation of where high standards are being done in foreign countries for us, but are not applied internally. And that's, I think, very tricky politics. This is a tricky one as well. A lot of people think this is protectionist, it's anti-progress, it ends up with petty nationalism, stupid localism, and you can't grow the diversity of food anywhere in the world that people want and would like to eat. My own view is that's an old argument, the free trade versus protectionism. It's an important argument. But my case is that we've actually got to protect the planet. We've got to protect the capacity to grow food anywhere and everywhere. And that flip side means everywhere has got to use land appropriately. So my new rule is not for imports or against imports, but everywhere is going to have to maximize production appropriately. And note the word appropriately. That doesn't mean to say you use a nuclear power plant to heat your greenhouse to get you all the year round tomatoes. That may not be the most appropriate use of your land. We've got to think much more carefully about what I call the omni-standards problem. Land has got to deliver both energy, food, sequester carbon, conserve water. We live on it, literally housing, amenity, identity. The multifunctionality of land is coming to a head now. So we're going to have a new approach, a new, more complex approach of understanding what we use land for. So behind this issue of do we import food or do we grow more food is this very big complex world of 21st century food policy and land use. But should we import food? Well, that's inevitable. We probably always will. Trade is in food is very old. The issue is how much food should we import, and are we importing food from other people using their land when we could grow it perfectly easily and well here? So there's a juggle that's got to go on. I go around the British countryside, see this stunning, beautiful legacy of wonderful soils, water, with nothing growing on it. Grass, that's fine, that's growing something, but is that the best use? That's what we're going to have to ask now. What's the appropriate use? One of the key issues is that late capitalism the neoliberal model that was ushered in the 1970s, which is now in a mess, not least with the banking and credit crunch crises, has actually introduced the notion that consumer information is the key to social change. I'm in favour of consumer information. I've argued, spent a lot of my life trying to campaign for better citizens and consumer understanding. But do I think lots of things can all be put onto a label and that resolves any complex problems? No. You could put a water label on a food. It would be possible. And colleagues of mine in an NGO called Sustain have mocked up some complex labels using my sort of omni-standard view of saying, well, let's look at water, let's look at the greenhouse gas emissions, let's look at nutrients, let's look at a whole variety of things. You can do it, but it becomes very complex. If you wanted to do it, go ahead and do it. But the most important thing is to prevent the problems in the first place, not just say to consumers, here's this green bean from Kenya or this meat from Britain and it's got this huge water embedded footprint in it. It's up to you whether you eat it. Well, that's actually putting the responsibility onto the individual consumer who maybe hasn't got the time, hasn't got the money, hasn't got the inclination to make that decision. So we're actually dumping onto individual consumers what is a structural problem. So I, in my own thinking, have moved much more upstream into thinking that we've got to choice edit rather than give consumers choice. We've got to frame the choices so that they're overwhelmingly in an ecologically sustainable direction. Not to say, oh, you can choose to eat the planet here or you can choose not to. That's ludicrous. We've got to actually reduce the choice to act unsustainably. How can we get companies to be more efficient? This is a tricky issue because it's not just companies that are involved. The whole problem about water accounting is that it goes from literally pre the farmer through to the consumer. Water is used and can be recycled and can be used better and more restrictively or worse at various points along the supply chain. The difficulty of thinking about water is that you actually have got to integrate the supply chains. You can't either leave it to the consumer or say it's all about the farmer, although both of them are very important. Companies which didn't take water seriously at all are now getting very nervous about it, not least because many of us have been champing, pushing, shoving and engaging with companies and saying, look, actually you're paying very cheaply for the water and you're not looking after it to conserve it. So there's quite a lot of hidden water accountancy work going on, which is really very, very welcome. How can we actually ensure that these companies act more responsibly? I think we need to have standards for that. I would like to see a British standard, a BSI, British Standards Institute, and an international standards organisation standard for water accounting, just like we've got now with the PAS, publicly available standard 2050, PAS 2050, on how to calculate greenhouse gases in a food product. I think that's really important. We've got to actually create some sort of common language to help companies to do it, to create consultants to enable those companies which haven't got internal facilities to do it. That process is beginning, but it's got to go very fast indeed. In Britain, we tend to think, oh, well, we're a rich country, we're actually rich in water, we're God's plug hole compared to many countries, but actually already Britain, parts of Britain which are big food growing areas like Kent, like East Anglia, are water stressed. We can't go on draining literally the deep aquifers and not letting the supply chain take responsibility for that. The short answer is all of us. This is a very complex issue. What I'm against is a situation where responsibility is dumped onto consumers or consumers dump it onto companies. Actually, I take the line that my colleagues in the Sustainable Development Commission, the government's advisor, on sustainability issues, of which I'm a commissioner, I take that position that was summarised in our report, the SDC report, I Will If You Will. Essentially, at the moment, what we've got is a spiral downwards. Everyone's passing the buck on to everyone else. My own view is that it's government that's got to unlock that vicious spiral and turn it into a virtuous circle upwards. And that's what we argued in I Will If You Will. To some extent, that's beginning to happen, I think, around the notion of sustainable diets. I'm championing that as an engagement point, both for consumers to think about what a sustainable diet, also governments what a sustainable diet, and also corporations over how do their products contribute to a sustainable diet. It's difficult, it's complex, but what we can say with great certainty is the diet that we're eating at the moment is not sustainable. So the moral question is that everyone's got to get engaged in this very fast indeed. But I think that's beginning. The final question is a really very small question. What do you think the biggest challenge for the 21st century is? I mean, the mind boggles at the question. I'm a food man, so I think about food. I think food is a very, very big challenge. If we don't sort out food, humanity doesn't survive. And food is really a microcosm of everything. How we live, how we use the planet, how we relate with other species, how we sit lightly or heavily on the earth. What we've done is basically mine the earth. In the last 60 years of so-called development, we've increased output, but we've done it at terrible cost that we're now realizing. Food and farming are huge contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. From the consumption point of view in Europe, we know from a study that food is 31% of all the consumer footprint. So we've got to sort out food or we're done for. So I think food is the biggest challenge. We've got to sort out food. But behind that is everything. That means altering aspirations, not expecting that we can eat meat morning, noon and night, eating and living simpler, eating differently. Yet here we are. I sit in the middle of London talking to you. This is an unsustainable system. How can London feed itself in a way that is appropriate for the 21st century? I don't know, but I think we've got the beginnings of an idea of what eating and feeding sustainably and growing food sustainably could look like. It must be good for climate change. In other words, it must reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, it must conserve water, it must look after the soil, it must be good for people and their health. It must be affordable, but that probably means our food will go up actually. Less money for videos and TVs, less money for clothes. But which is more important? Food or the 42nd shirt? I don't know. My own view is it's food.